I'm just laughing at myself because I feel like I've picked the two most controversial plants you can have in a tea garden to talk about today. One of them can ruin a garden, and the other one has the potential, even though it is edible in a lot of cases, to make you really sick. But I think it's important that we talk about these two because whenever I talk about the tea garden, I get a lot of questions about mints and marigolds. You asked me to start doing tea garden deep dives on the plants that I'm growing in the tea garden for tea, and I thought we'd just start with the most difficult ones. I really don't have a ton of different types of mint, and there are so many different kinds. So let me know down below which kinds you're growing. I have 4 different kinds that I grow in my garden, and 2 of them are new this year. They're new because I just planted out this mini container tea garden, which I did a whole video on exactly how I plant out a container garden, which I'll link for you here. But within this very lush mini tea garden, I do have a couple kinds of mint. I have an apple mint right here, and then I also have a banana mint back here, which I'll show you in a second. These 2 have been so happy in this container. I also had an orange mint going in the greenhouse at one point, but it didn't get watered when I was out on vacation, so it was a casualty of me going away. I have both the apple mint and the orange mint growing in a container because the reason that mint can be kind of controversial is that it can totally take over a garden. These are very invasive plants. They're fast growers, they're fast spreaders. They don't take long before you're finding them absolutely everywhere in your garden, so it's super important to contain them. Now there's a couple ways you can do this. I do have them completely isolated in my whiskey barrel planters so that they can't kind of spread into other parts of the garden. But even within these containers, I have to be careful to keep up on pruning because these trailing types, they can get down to the ground and they can actually root themselves in whatever medium they can connect with on the surface there. Different mints are gonna have different growth habits too. Like I have one mint here that's growing really straight up in the air, and then I have another one that's more of a sprawling ground cover that is trailing over the sides more as it grows. If you don't want to stick your mint in a dedicated container, you can actually keep it in a nursery pot and then bury that nursery pot in your raised bed or in-ground garden so that the roots are still contained. The only thing with this is that it could still spread and have those stems propagate and root themselves along the surface of the soil. So it's just really important that you're keeping on top of pruning. The 2 other varieties that I'm growing are spearmint, which is in ground. Doesn't spread as quickly in my experience. So this one we have in the ground in another part of the garden. So you could try spearmint in the ground if you're willing to risk it. It's still invasive, it can still spread. I'm just telling you, in my experience, it has not spread as badly. If you want to grow mint in the ground and you don't want to worry about it spreading, there's one native option that I've had in an in-ground bed for 10 plus years now. My mom planted this and it has never taken over. It does grow pretty fast, but it's not one that will absolutely ruin your entire garden and you'll be finding it absolutely everywhere. And that's mountain mint. Mountain mint is a native mint variety. It's my favorite mint to grow. I think it has the most potent flavor, the most minty flavor, without kind of veering into that spearmint territory if you don't like the flavor of spearmint. Now apple mint, banana mint, orange mint, these mints are all supposed to have the essence of those fruits. I have not, in my personal experience, noticed that. Maybe my taste buds aren't refined enough, but I just like to have the variety. They are different in their own right. They don't just necessarily taste like apples, bananas, or oranges. But mountain mint is just this pure, clean mint flavor, and it has the most beautiful flowers and foliage. And the pollinators, because it is a native, absolutely go wild over it. Because it's perennial, because it's native, it's so low maintenance. I've never fertilized it. It just grows and grows. Now, if you're planting mint from seed, which honestly I've never done, I just grab a start from the nursery, you want to be planting that about a 1/4 inch deep and giving your mint plants 1 to 2 feet apart because they will bush out and spread. Now obviously I've got a 24-inch whiskey barrel here, and I've got 2 mint plants in it, and they're doing just fine. I do have them on opposite ends, but we packed everything in really, really tightly in this container, so we're just adding fertilizer often to make sure that those nutrients aren't depleted, and the plant will be more restricted in its size as a result, and that's totally fine. And mint isn't just really good for your digestion, it also helps with stress, focus, bad breath, headaches, trouble sleeping. It's generally just a very calming herb, and so it's one that I do recommend, although there are kind of risks to it, and you'll see controversy online about people who make a rookie mistake in the garden and they plant it in a container and they can never get rid of it. I still think it is one that is worth growing in every garden, especially a tea garden. But if you're not doing a tea garden, just planting that native mountain mint variety for here in North America, outside of the amazing benefits that it has for your health, mint also repels cabbage whites, aphids, and flea beetles. So it's a really good companion plant for the garden, especially with your brassicas. It also attracts those predatory wasps that feed on the cabbage white larva. Mint is one of those plants that you want to harvest really regularly, cutting it back pretty hard because it will take over. It's such a vigorous grower. It doesn't need anything special in terms of soil or fertilization because, again, it's such an aggressive grower. As for location, it prefers full sun, but it can do partial shade just as well. It's a really easy plant to grow as a beginner, which I think is why so many people gravitate towards it. You just need to know a couple of things about containing it in order to make sure that the rest of your garden has the opportunity to thrive too. Now, when we're talking about harvesting, you can cut this back pretty far. I've actually got 2 nodes right here, and if I want this plant to grow more bushy, I'm going to cut right above that point. And so now these will become more dominant stems, and we can take our longer piece back into the greenhouse to dry it. And we're just going to do this all the way around, cutting it back. So it's probably about 5 inches tall right now. I could have maybe gone back a little bit harder and it would have been fine. We've got a nice little bunch here that we can dry for later. And on this side, you can see the growth habit is just totally different. It's flopping over the edge, and this one's even starting to flower a little bit, which is totally fine. But I'm just gonna hold a whole bunch of it at once because it's the smaller type, and cut it off in chunks, and holding it together in this bundle so that we can just tie it up really easily. Now I'm gonna show you how to dry the mint and the marigolds at the end of this, but before we do that, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about the marigolds because there's been a lot of confusion about whether or not marigolds are edible, and I wanna address this once and for all because in my tea video, I said that they were edible, and they are, with some exceptions that it's really important to know if you're going to be planting these in a tea garden or for culinary use of any kind. You need to make sure that they're the edible types. So a lot of times when we see like the medicinal benefits of marigolds, we're actually seeing the medicinal benefits of something called pot marigold, and pot marigolds are not marigolds at all, they're calendula. Calendula has tons of amazing health benefits, but that's actually not the plant that I'm talking about today. I am talking about true marigolds, and there's 2 different types of true marigolds that are edible. Those are the French marigolds and African marigolds. And those are the most common varieties that you will find in your big box store, your local nursery, but there are many, many different hybrids of marigolds that are not safe to eat. So it's important to know what you're growing if you're gonna grow marigolds for culinary use. But if you're watching this and you're thinking, well, I don't know what kind I planted, I don't know if they are safe to eat, they're still useful plants to have in your garden, even if you don't have them in there for consumption. They've actually found that marigolds are excellent at suppressing root knot nematodes, which can have a huge impact on the health of your garden. Marigolds also attract tons of beneficial bugs like ladybugs, wasps, hoverflies, and of course your bees. Marigolds are extremely heat and drought tolerant, and they also repel my 2 least favorite garden pests, hornworms and cabbage whites. So they are a must grow in the garden, in my opinion, whether or not you're going to eat them. And they're really easy to grow too, just like mint. I've grown marigolds from seed and from starts. It's easy to do either way. Obviously, seed is going to take a little bit longer. You want to be starting those in late spring. They do love full sun and well draining soil, but honestly, they're one of those where I really think you can stick them wherever and they're gonna do okay. And then as far as maintenance goes, all I'm really doing is deadheading spent blooms like this. And this one actually is packed with free seeds. So realistically, they're a plant you only ever need to buy once, because look at this. This is just a single seed head, and it probably has well over 100 seeds in it that we can use to regrow marigolds in our garden next year. Deadheading is also going to encourage more blooms. So that's how you get big, beautiful, bushy marigold plants, is by continuously deadheading to stimulate the plant for new growth. I always thought these kind of looked like hedgehog quills. If you're not sure if you have French or African, but you know they're one or the other, you can tell them apart by the blooms themselves. So the French blooms, the stalks are going to be 6 to 12 inches tall. The blooms are going to be about 2 inches across, and they come in single or double varieties. African blooms are going to be 1 to 3 feet tall, and they're always going to be a double bloom variety. So they're really large. These are like your mission giants, which are also edible. But honestly, if I'm telling you what to grow in a tea garden and you have limited space, I'm going to tell you to grow pot marigold or calendula before I tell you to grow marigold. And that's just because, as much as I love a good marigold, calendula has most of the same exact benefits, and they just taste a little bit better. So this holds true for pretty much any flower that you're picking for medicinal reasons, but timing is super important. So it's still early morning here, which is ideal. I would probably have waited maybe another 30 minutes before I did this, only because it rained last night and these blooms are a little bit damp. So we want them to be dry from the morning dew, but not so dry that the heat of the afternoon sun has kind of dried out the essential oils that the plants produce overnight to protect themselves. So those essential oils have a lot of the health benefits and beneficial compounds that we're looking for. So I am also going through and just deadheading as I go. These ones aren't ones that we would want to actually dry for tea. We still want to save them because they have tons of free seeds for us. So I'm going to pick some of these marigolds, and I'm just cutting them about 2 inches off of the bloom here, and they will rebloom. We don't want to cut them back too hard so that they have a chance to rebloom. And now we can bring these inside and dry them. So common sense would dictate, if these plants have been out for any extended amount of time, there's a chance that a bird pooped on them, or even some kind of larger bug. And so it's a good idea to wash these herbs before you actually dry them, because you want to make sure that you're not drying any kind of gross germs onto your plants. So make sure to rinse them off first, really pat them dry well, because if we're doing kind of a tight clump like this, there's a good chance that air won't be able to get to the center. Mold can kind of build up in there. With all these kind of bunches of herbs, what we're going to do is just tie a string around them. You can use twine. I'm using a cotton yarn here, and I'm just tying a tight knot, because as it dries, it's going to shrink as that water content goes down, and we don't want the stems falling out of the knot that we've created. Now, you can hang this little bunch from pretty much anything, but you do want to keep it in a cool, dry place with fairly good ventilation, and it's most important that you're keeping it out of the sunlight. So as much as I would love to hang beautiful bunches of fresh herbs from my greenhouse rafters, the sun right now is going to kind of deplete all those beautiful beneficial compounds that we love so much. So I am going to put it in this ventilated bag that I've got right here. And what we can do with this is kind of tie our string again around that. And then it's got a nice like loop right here, and we can hang this pretty much anywhere because it's protected from sunlight. Otherwise, I would say just hang it inside of a cabinet, a closet, something like that, where it is protected from the sun until it is fully dry and crispy. Or you can throw them in a dehydrator, in the microwave, even in your oven at a really low temperature. It just totally depends on what you have available to you, and there's no kind of right or wrong answer as long as your herbs are clean, they're protected from sunlight, and they're well ventilated so that they can dry out completely. Now, for larger plants like these flowers, obviously they're kind of coming off of this main stem that's really, really dense. So there's a couple ways that we can do this. We can actually remove all of the petals individually and sprinkle them on a tray that has ventilation. This is literally just a pizza tray that I have that I use for pizza night. Or if you want to go the easier, lazier route that may not dry out as fast or has the potential, if you're not in a super dry climate, if your area is really humid, it has the potential to cause mold issues. Stick the stem through whatever slotted material you're using so that it stays upright and has a chance to fully dry out. When these do dry out, they really do shrivel up quite a lot in comparison to our fresh blooms. And you'll find that if you just pull them straight out, you're gonna see a lot of those seeds. So it's a good idea to kind of pinch the base and break it off at that point if you don't want to eat the seeds. But in a tea, it doesn't really matter. You could have stuck this whole flower in there and done a whole flower tea and you would have been perfectly fine. So it's kind of like a choose your own adventure on what you'd prefer to do for these. I prefer to kind of loosen the petals up beforehand just because it really does help them to dry out a lot faster. I hope this was helpful if you're considering growing mint or marigold in your garden, or you already have it and you don't know what to do with it. Let me know if you have any questions about mint or marigold that I didn't cover, and also let me know if there's another plant you'd like me to do a deeper dive on. Thank you so much for gardening with me, and happy growing.